Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined as always by managing editor Ross Binder and publisher of the site, Adam Jacoby. Before we get started, make sure you drop a like, drop a comment there on YouTube. Let us know how you're feeling right now, Hawkeye fans. We know last time Iowa dropped that loss to Iowa State, it was a safe space in our comments, and we are keeping it as such with that 35-7 drubbing that Iowa took at the hands of Ohio State this evening. As well as you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, please leave that rate and review. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. So I think we'll go with the normal framework that we do on these podcasts, in that we'll start with the negative because there's plenty of negative to go. I don't know where we're going to find the positive in this particular circumstance, other than that there's a bunch of other games left, and they're probably not going to lose 35-7 in the rest of these games. But we'll start with the negative, and I think the most glaring thing is what I wrote about post game, in that Iowa, I tweeted this out at one point, and it's different now. At one point today, Iowa was outscored 148-0 in their last 17 quarters against ranked opponents. And by the end of the game, that became 155-7 in their last 18 quarters against ranked opponents. And what did we hear from Kirk Ferentz post game in response to not necessarily those numbers, but just the clear discrepancy between his team and ranked teams they faced? Oh, we just got to get back to work. Well, you've been able to get back to work for the last 3 years, and that gap isn't closing. It's getting bigger. Ross, tell me your thoughts on this particular subject and just about how big that freaking gap is between them and programs like Ohio State.
Yeah, definitely. To me, this game was the first big stress test for the Tim Lester offense at Iowa. He comes in the off season, he's making over the offense. And the question is, what's it going to look like? Well, through the first 4 games, I think the results were generally pretty positive, especially in the running game. The running game was really clicking. It was 10th in the nation heading into this game. There was hitting over 200 yards a game on the regular. Kaleb Johnson looked fantastic. But there was always the question looming. It was like, okay, you're doing it against Troy, you're doing it against Iowa State, Minnesota, etc. What happens when you face a ranked team, a really good team, like in Ohio State? And we know what has happened in those games the last couple of years. They've been debacles. It hasn't been close, has not been competitive. And I think the question a lot of Iowa fans had, or a lot of Iowa media and observers had, was what happens with this new offense when they face a real test? And the answer is they failed it. This was not They were not competitive on an offensive level in this game, really at all. They ran 0 plays in the Ohio State red zone. The only touchdown in the game came in the fourth quarter, when they were already down 35-0, and there were some Ohio State, second stringers mixed in on defense. So you're not getting, the full effort on defense from the Buckeyes. But in the first half, when the game is close, when it's competitive, Iowa just could not consistently move the ball, could not, put the offense in positions to threaten to score. They moved the ball, they got some first downs, etc. But it was never looking like, oh, Iowa's really got something going here. That was my perception, at least. Adam, did you have a different view, or what'd you think?
Yeah, for the most part, I would tend to agree with that. And certainly there was almost a lack of urgency, especially in that first half when Iowa was still able to control the ball, was still able to sustain a few drives. Now, obviously, it doesn't really matter all that much in the third quarter when you're just giving the ball away. But when Iowa had this game close in that first half, there were opportunities. And we can talk about, some of the fourth down shenanigans that happened in that first quarter, a variety of them, but by and large, it did look like there were times when Iowa had the chance to sustain drives, keep them going, be more aggressive with the need to get in the end zone. And by and large, they just didn't take it. Now, again, some of it was, as random as Kaleb Johnson, of all people, slipping on the 30-yard line or thereabouts on 3rd and short. And I'm not sure he would have made the first down, but he would have been close enough for Iowa to, at the very least, think about going for that 4th and short. As it stood, it turned into Drew Stevens trying to kick a long field goal. And, he was just about a yard wide. And, does he, at the very least, like get it inside the upright? If I was, I don't know, 2 yards closer to the end zone, tough to say, but that is sort of one of those things where luck wasn't going Iowa's way, but also Iowa didn't, try to show that, hey, it doesn't matter that we're, ball isn't bouncing our way, the footing isn't going our way. We still need to get in the end zone. We're not going to beat Ohio State by punting from the 50 or kicking field goals, or, when the other team has a mecca, oh God,
like Buka.
Egbuka.
Thank you. Let's try that one again. When the other team has a Mecca Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith, and they're able to make play after play, even when you are covering them, you can't really dink and dunk your way and nibble on the edges all the way to winning a game like that. Not with an as explosive an offense as OSU has. And, this is also year 27 of Kirk Ferentz. At some point, you can't expect him to start to understand that. At some point, you sort of have to understand that this is going to be the way that he approaches games. And a few years ago, you look back, not even a decade ago, it worked against Michigan. It has worked against, some top 5 teams, but doesn't work anymore. And Iowa sort of needs to evolve or find someone who will evolve it for them, because this sort of formula of nibbles and chomps and this and that, it's almost like trying to break a casino at the penny slots. Like it does not work that way. That is a losing strategy.
What I will say in response to that, Adam, is I think to a degree, my larger point here is Iowa's just flat out not going to have the talent of these teams, right? They never have, they never will have the talent that Ohio State, especially now when you have to buy talent. They just won't have that as Michigan and Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama, even though one of those teams lost to freaking Vanderbilt today. But it just won't happen that way. And so to a degree, you kind of have to do the dink and dunk stuff, right? To a degree. But you also have to take chances. And if you don't capitalize on those chances, it's we tried. We tried. Right. You cannot go nervous turtle when you're at the 50 and it's 4th and inches. 4th and inches. To call that timeout, like, it's okay. See the linebackers creeping up to go close to the line of scrimmage. Okay, that makes sense. Fine. Time. But let's then send the offense out there. Or send the offense out there from the get-go. Maybe run, you can't even run hurry up because it was a bad call, and then they had to go back and look at it and respot it. It looked like a first down on the replay and stuff that I saw. Fine. We're not blaming the officials for this loss at all. But it was also 4th and 3 on that 51-yard field goal. And to boot, first drive of the game, Cade barely avoids all the sacks and stuff, and then can't hit his receiver, 30 yards downfield? And I don't know if he was on the run. I'd have to go back and look at the film, but it's just missed opportunity after missed opportunity when you have to take advantage against teams that are this much more talented than you are. You can't let those things go to the wayside. You have to take advantage of every opportunity. And if taking advantage of every opportunity happens and you still lose, well, damn. You tried. Again, you tried. You didn't go, no, I want to punt from the 50. Like, and then it was an awful punt. Like, Reese is a freshman. I give him the benefit of the doubt there. I'm sure he was trying to put it in the corner off his foot. It went to the frickin' sideline. To have all of that happen in the sequence of like a minute of actual gameplay, it was just a complete and utter flop. Like, there's nobody to blame but coaching for all of those things. Every single one.
And to sort of go back to that point about that punt in particular, and yeah, I get that you call the timeout if you see the defense expecting that fake punt, which everybody in the stadium expected that fake punt. No one was going to get caught off guard there. But again, yeah, that's when you go for it, because you know full well that you have a true freshman punter back there. You know that this would not be his first shank. This would not be his first tough game, right? If you have Torrey Taylor back there punting, you kick that with more confidence. But that consistency has not been there from Maurice Dakin yet, nor should you expect it to be there from, again, a true freshman punter with a cannon for a leg, but his situational punting, directional sort of stuff is not where Torrey's was. And again, no true freshman has that.
Well,
And
I would just add, not only is it a matter of Dakin's, punting, but it's also a matter of the coverage units and the gunners fielding the ball. They're not as good at it this year as we've seen in the past. Like,
Cooper DeJean was at the game today, but he wasn't wearing gold and white.
He was on the sideline, but he wasn't in Hawkeye gear. Or
maybe that's where that shank went. Like, do we know where Cooper was sitting in the, no, but like, just to jokes aside, understanding that your punt unit is not what last year's was or the years before, or, you don't have two All-Americans, like reigning All-Americans doing the punt and catch aspect of this. Why do you trust that more than a 4th and inches call with your offense? And again, knowing the game that you're playing. Yes, inches. Knowing the game that you're playing. Knowing that you are going to need to score and to be aggressive about scoring, because that other team is, right? Like, that other team is catching balls where the guys are covered. Right. You can dial up coverages all you want. They're still going to be moving the ball even when you dial up a perfect defense. You have got to be able to respond with points when you've got the ball and not just try to field position an explosive team like this.
They have an 18-year-old who would probably be a top 5 NFL draft pick this year.
Right now.
Yeah. And the other receiver gonna be in the NFL too. Probably a top 3 round draft pick, Emeka Egbuka.
Oh yeah, he's excellent.
Yeah. And you're not like, man, swing it, throw a haymaker. If you whiff, you whiff. And I mean, we didn't even like in the 4th and inches put Brendan Sullivan under center, right?
Yeah.
We didn't even see him until it was garbage time because they didn't even get in the freaking red zone.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing is like, so you create this package of plays for him around the goal line because it's short yardage and you like what he does there. Okay, here's a short yardage situation. It's middle of the field, not the end zone, but otherwise it's short yardage. You still need someone that can gain a yard, and that's what you have him running those packages to do essentially. So yeah, that everything about that situation was just baffling and terrible.
And you have statistically the best running back in Power 4. You're not going to hand him the football to boot. And I noted this, and maybe we flip here to to get off this 4th and inches topic. But you have the best player on your offense, one of the best running backs in the country, and you give him 15 carries against one of the best teams in the country. I'm all for I don't retract the things that I just said about taking, advantage of opportunity, or, taking opportunities, right? Going for the maybe not analytically favorable situations because you have to take chances against one of these really good teams because you don't have the talent. But what you do have is Kaleb Johnson, who you could have just fed, and he only broke one run of more than like 6 yards today, something like that.
He had two.
He had
Yeah,
two. Oh, yeah, touchdown.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
But this is when you have an all-American quality running back, if there's a game to give him 30 carries, it's against arguably the best defense in the Big Ten, if not the best defense in the Big Ten, if not one of the better defenses in the country. You hammer him, and Jazz Patterson, while he's been a good compliment, I think got too many carries in the first half. Probably the second half too. I'd have to look at the stats, but he's a compliment. He's not a feature back. You have the feature back. You have an every down back. You have an all-American running back. Give him the fucking football.
Yeah, and just to sort of hammer this sort of point home, what have we learned from how Iowa's offense has approached the games that they've won this year? And I don't want to start this whole tale of two quarter or like tale of two halves, because that cliche is just dead and buried at this point. But what it is strategically is lean on them in the first half, lean on them in the first half, lean on them in the first half. And then in that second half, you start to wear down those defenses. And Iowa just never tried to do that.
That's a great time to go to Jazz Patterson, because who the hell wants to tackle Jazz Patterson?
Yeah. And I get that Ohio State has a deep defensive line. They've got a deep defensive front, so they're not as prone to tiring out as, say, Illinois State. Okay, fine. I get that. However, the whole point of how this rushing offense is structured is to run the ball for 4 quarters and to make sure that defense can keep up with guys like Kaleb Johnson and Jazz Patterson for 4 quarters. Now, obviously, there were some turnovers hampering things in that third quarter, but regardless of that, they have to be more of a feature of your run game. And then you build out those play actions. Then you build out those explosives. Then you have those RPOs where you're like, all right, we see what formation you're in. We're going to dial up this mismatch right here. And you didn't really see that long form strategery from the Iowa offense as this one played out. Again, third quarter was an absolute disaster in terms of taking care of the football, but even like without that, you didn't see the logic and structure behind how Iowa attacked this game. You just didn't.
Well, to piggyback on that, Adam, I think this also ties back to, what we just talked about, which was the conservatism on those fourth down plays, especially because, those are plays like for the approach you're talking about to work. The offense needs to keep the ball, keep drives going, keep the running game on the field and pushing forward. And they had the opportunities to do that, where in the first half were, a lot of those drives that ended with 4th and short around midfield, or the field goal drive that was 4th and 3 when they decided to kick it. Like, if you can keep those drives going, keep the offense on the field, get more carries for Kaleb or Jazz, and then you can actually hopefully get that game plan of grinding down the defense. Maybe try to get that some traction, but you can't do that and just punt away the ball the way Iowa did. Not in a game like this. That just isn't going to work, and obviously it did not work.
To boot, I think it was the first play of the second half, their first possession after Ohio State drove the field and scored, make it 14-0.
That was the strip sack on McNamara.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
That's one of those circumstances. You don't put the ball in your best player's hands. You drop back. It's a strip sack. It's 21-0. Like if one thing we used to say about Brian Ferentz is everything is hard. Everything is difficult. And those are circumstances where you make everything hard. You make it difficult on yourself. 14-0, 21-0, very different against a team like Ohio State. Very different in general, but especially against a team like Ohio State. You're down 14-0. You can push the field. You can go the field. You can lean on them. You can lean on them. You can lean on them and score. 14-7, very different than 21-0, right? And this is another shift that I want to make that we have to talk about from tonight's game, and it's Cade McNamara. 14 of 20 for 98 yards and an interception.
And the 2 fumbles.
That's 3 turnovers in the first 15 minutes and 8 seconds of the second half. These games are why you paid Cade McNamara all that money. That's why you got Kirk Ferentz suspended for a game because you illegally for this dude. You went out and got this guy because he was a playoff quarterback. Took the Wolverines to the college football playoff before it was 12 teams, when it was 4 teams. Granted, they got shellacked when they got there, but still. This is what you brought this guy in for. And what did we talk about before we started hitting record? He hasn't thrown a touchdown pass against an FBS team this year. Hasn't thrown a touchdown pass against a Power 4 team since he's been in black and gold. This is not what you brought this dude in for. It's just not.
No, and he does have that track record of success, and inevitably, when Kirk is asked about him on Tuesday, I guarantee you he's going to bring up, well, he's got that history of winning. And, sure, but he also had Michigan Wolverines surrounding him for that. And that talent level isn't there at Iowa. It just isn't. And so what does McNamara bring to the table that is going to create more of a mismatch, or, is going to create more of an advantage against Ohio State? We did see him move in the pocket, create some open pockets for catches downfield, 2 of them, right? Okay, great. We also saw Brendan Sullivan run away from what would have been a sure sack for just about any Iowa QB over the last decade or so, and turn it into a 30-yard gain. And Ross, you remember that 2001 Michigan game. I am going to keep bringing up 2001 Brad Banks here because I think that's the closest corollary that we've got to this McNamara Sullivan situation. It reminds me so much of Kyle McCann and Brad Banks in 2001. Now, Brad Banks in 2001 was not the Brad Banks of 2002, but he got there by earning more and more trust and demonstrating, especially in that Michigan game in 2001, demonstrating that he was able to use that dual threat athleticism to sustain drives, to get Iowa into that end zone, to create points essentially. And no, Iowa didn't win that game thanks to Marquise Walker, but it at the very least demonstrated that the next guy in line knows what he's doing. And the fact that Iowa is not at the very least letting Sullivan explore the space, unless it's either A, within 5 yards of the end zone, or B, when the game is completely out of reach. I get that you want to show some sort of faith to McNamara, your senior, this, that, blah, blah, blah. You're supposed to be winning these games, right? Faith doesn't win games. It's nice. It makes you feel better about that money you spent on NIL. But at the end of the day, you have to put your team in the best position to win these games. And I'm sure we're going to get told on Tuesday, well, McNamara is practicing better than Sullivan. And that might be true. People need to hear how exactly he's practicing better. Because right now it is not correlating to what we see on the fields and how, and who's under center when this team is scoring touchdowns and when it's not. That's the evidence that people have to work on outside of that building in Iowa City. All right, tell us what McNamara is doing better. And it can't just be, well, he's got the experience. What is 2024 Cade McNamara? doing better than 2024 Brendan Sullivan? It seems like that should be an easy question to ask if he's the guy that you are trusting to be QB1 while, like, for every minute that the game is still in doubt. Then what is it?
Well, you know, Adam, you referenced the 01 Banks McCann situation, and you know, in comparing it to that, like Iowa isn't giving Sullivan the opportunities that Banks got that year, and they're just coming off a bye week. They've had 2 weeks to prep for this Ohio State game, 2 weeks to introduce any new wrinkles into the offensive playbook, or you know, to further develop a package for Brendan Sullivan to run. Like,
Did you see anything in that game that you hadn't seen the first 4 weeks, Ross? Did you see anything new from the
No.
Iowa offense that were like, oh, this is
well,
what they were waiting for?
there was the weirdest flea flicker I've ever seen, I think. I can't even call it it's not a flea flicker if you hand it off, right?
That's what I was just gonna say. It was like, did he pitched it and then he hit it? Like, they got that backwards. And this was pointed out on another podcast, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they ran that against man.
Yeah, the coverage was tight. Yeah, it was going nowhere.
You don't run flea against man. You run that against zone.
Right. And you do it when the safeties are up.
Yep.
It wasn't a lot of zone. I mean, that was probably not a good play call today for a lot of reasons, but there was not a lot of zone coverage from Ohio State's defensive backs because they didn't need zone coverage against Iowa's receivers. I mean,
no. Yeah, if you're Jim Knowles, is like, oh yeah, we're manning the shit out of these guys. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they were just bully-balling Reese Vanderzee in that game. Like, he was getting shoved all over the field. You know, to what extent it was holding or pass interference, you know, that's eye of the beholder. But that was definitely a welcome to the Big Ten freshman game, I thought.
Here's why none of that got a call. And also for the fans who are wondering why that just absolutely incredible Jeremiah Smith TD was an offensive pass interference. Here's why refs are never throwing that flag against Smith and the flags on the coverage that Vanderzee was facing. Smith was not trying to create, like, he wasn't trying to knock the guy over. He was not trying to keep Deshaun Lee from intercepting a pass. Like, he was just bodying him. That was just like, buddy, I'm bigger than you. And also there was plenty of hand fighting between the two. Like, it was never a case of one guy is just abusing the other, right? They were both fighting. And I like the fact that refs often do that when it doesn't have a like hugely impactful like effect on the actual outcome of the play. And then with Vanderzee, again, like, the cornerbacks are not like getting beat by him. They're daring him to beat them, and he's not able to do it. And I get, yeah, you know, hey, 6'5", 210, or you know what his measurements are. But Columbus is a long way from Rock Rapids, from northwest Iowa. Like, again, like he said, welcome to the Big Ten. And, you know, that's what the weight room is for. That's what S&C is for. And you know, come 2025, 26, Vanderzee's going to be pushing some dudes around himself. But like, yeah, welcome to Columbus. Welcome to the shoe.
Would have been a good game to have Caleb Brown if they would have even gotten him the ball. Now, I guess to kind of flip things to talk kind of positively, the defense did keep them in the game in the first half, right? Like, offenses missed opportunities, kept them from doing anything well. But like, Sebastian Castro interception, Jay Higgins on a huge gain by Ohio State, punched the ball out and recovered it himself. Like, I tweeted it. He's an NFL linebacker. He's the best in the country. Like, nobody else is making that play.
Gary on the broadcast, Gary Danielson tried to argue that play somehow made up for the fact that Kirk Ferentz decided to punt the ball on that 4th and short. I'm like,
Yeah.
don't say that. But it was a great play by Higgins.
Doesn't make up for anything.
No.
And then YA Black had to stop on 4th and 1, which was a bad play call. I think Will Howard was in shotgun and they tried to run it. Other than that, I mean, Jay also finished with 14 tackles. Quinn Schulte had 8, which is not good. Deshaun Lee had 7, which is not good.
Those were not run support tackles for a lot of those either.
No.
Or they were run support 7 yards down the field.
Yeah, or more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what that really demonstrates, though, is that, Ohio State is just sort of a really, really bad matchup for Iowa, because if you just look at the matchups position by position, guy by guy, who on Iowa's defense is Ohio State supposed to be afraid of? Maybe Jay Higgins, but you can't really scheme away from him all that much.
No.
They weren't afraid of Castro. They sure weren't afraid of Quinn Schulte or Kyler Fisher. Oh, Kyler Fisher having to guard Emeka Egbuka on a wheel route. And I get that some of that's scheme-wise, but it reminded me a whole lot of that. I think it was the 2006 Alamo Bowl where Mike Humple ended up in coverage on a wheel route by
Adam,
your 2,000-yard.
You're starting to sound like Kirk Ferentz. Reminds me.
Yeah, well, I'm not the guy who's scheming Mike Humple to cover Jamal Charles on a wheel route. So I'm not sounding like him that much, but I get the trust in your seniors. But Kyler Fisher is going pro in something other than sports. And he's going up against a guy who is just an absolute freak. And at some point, you got to have the guys on the field who can play against these absolute freaks. And, Iowa's got a few of those on defense, but they got some, easier marks than, say Cooper DeJean was, or, than Bob Sanders was. And, Quinn Schulte, God love him, but he looked really, really physically overmatched in this game.
He looked like a future dentist. Yeah. I think what this really comes down to as well, and you just said it, Adam, is there's no Cooper DeJean hanging around to help you out. There's no Tim Dwight, you don't have that type of dude that, is a threat to score every time he touches the ball, other than Kaleb Johnson, right? Like you don't have, like, Caden Weegen's good in the punt return game, in the kick return game, but he's not Cooper, right? You don't even have that glimmer of hope of the one dude, when you're matching up with these teams. And so it's just an added little, check mark. It's like, well, there's another advantage Ohio State. There's another. It's just another one. But I guess the one thing I wanted to do in going from offense to defense here is like, where do we find the positives? Tim Lester's going to find the positives because he's just that. He has that demeanor, right? He has that disposition.
Tim Lasso.
Where are we finding positives here for Iowa football? I've got a few, but they're just like maybe a glimmer. I'm just curious what you guys. I'll start with you guys. Adam, you go first, and we'll talk a little bit more.
Well, honestly, I would say the positive for this game is it's over. And I don't even mean that in a backhanded way. It's just look at the rest of the schedule, and there's no team that is going to be able to victimize so many different starters for this Iowa team as Ohio State is capable of. Right? Like Michigan State is not trotting out Jeremiah Smith. Aiden Childs is good. Don't get me wrong, but right, like Washington is not last year's Washington. And we have seen through the first 4 weeks against more mortal competition that Iowa is capable of shutting down more mediocre offenses. It's just when Ohio State has a guy like Will Howard, who is fine, he can throw the ball pretty much accurately, and all you have to do is get it close to those receivers. That's sort of a one-off situation for the season. It just is. Because when it's Max, I guess it is Brosmer, by the way. Like, yeah, he can beat USC, but USC doesn't have Iowa's defense. that the way that USC versus how Iowa played in Minneapolis is why it really does not make a whole lot of sense to overreact to how Iowa played in Columbus. Because again, like that is a freak of a team. That is a surefire national championship contender. They are going to make the playoffs, like barring some absolute disaster. That Buckeye team is absolutely making the playoffs and is probably going to make some noise while they're there too. So there's almost not too much negative that you do want to read into this game for the rest of Iowa's season, just because they're just not going to be playing anybody like the Buckeyes. Now, that being said, for the most part, I thought the run defense, especially in that second half, sort of bowed up a little bit because Henderson and Judkins were running wild in that first half, and Iowa, figured out ways to slow them down. Now, obviously, that also coincided with Egbuka going absolutely bananas in that second half, and Will Howard didn't even throw an incomplete pass in that second half. That probably ought to be looked at. But again, we're talking about a pass game and a connection between QB and receiver that is basically a one-off for Iowa's season this year. So it's sort of a roundabout answer to that question, but I would say it's at the very least a little bit better than Kirk saying, yeah, I think Cade's still improving. Oh, his timing was great today. At the very least, we can definitively look at Iowa's schedule and say, well, not getting tougher than that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also kind of hate to, when the best thing you can say about it is not something that the team itself did, but like, well, there's nobody as tough as that on the schedule. Like, it's 100% true. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little demoralizing when you can't point to anything Iowa did also and say, well, that's something good to build off of. Although I would argue the defense actually did well. 35 points, 400 yards, not good numbers overall, but this game got totally out of control in that third quarter with all those turnovers because the Ohio State offense took over 3 times, like inside the 40-yard line. Essentially, it's like the Iowa defense. Well, it'd be nice to force a turnover or force a field goal at least, and they couldn't do that, which not great. But they're backed up against such a wall at that point, and just a wave of momentum flipping in Ohio State's favor at that point in the shoe. It's like that's tough for anybody to slow down, essentially. So I'm not too upset about the defense. They gave up 2 long drives, one at the start of the game, one at the start of the second half, and they forced a couple turnovers, got a 4th down stop in the first half. I think there are good things there you can build off of, especially, like Adam said, they don't have to see, Egbuka and the freshmen and the running backs. Like, those guys, see ya. I was not going to play them again, barring a shocking rematch in the Big Ten championship game at this point. So that's
Which
good
will
news.
not be happening.
Yeah. So that's great news for the defense. As far as the offense, like, I don't know. I have a hard time finding things to be positive about there as long as Cade McNamara is getting 90% of the snaps because, like Eliot, you pointed out the numbers, they're grim. And it's been several games at this point, and you're just not seeing that production there. So
what I will say is in comparison to last year, the offense is clearly better. It's not good, but it's better, right? Like going into this week, I think they were 66th in offense, which for Iowa is unreal, and that they're not going to be 66th after this week. But that, and plus there were opportunities. I just think we have to keep things in context as well, because I don't think anybody that, covers the team professionally expected or picked Iowa to win this one. I don't think anybody did. So we all saw this coming. The world is not going to end, right? The sun will come up tomorrow. I think Jay said that after the Iowa State loss. But the sun will come up tomorrow. And there's going to be another opportunity against the team in Washington who just beat Michigan, and that might help your resume a little bit. I don't think, like you said, Adam, I don't see Big Ten championship happening. Like college football playoff, I said this from the beginning, basically off the table with 2 losses. And unless they run the table and somehow the schedules from the other teams and win-loss records work out to them making the Big Ten championship game again, they'd have to win it. They'd have to beat Ohio State. They'd have to beat Oregon in order to get in. And it's just like
there's no reason to expect it.
It's a percent of a percent likelihood. So many things have to go their way, right? So again, context matters here. Ohio State's really freaking good. I think, I'm not going to get on board with Kirk and say that Cade McNamara is getting better and we just have to get back to work and all these things, right? Like, I'm not on board with that. But at the same time, I don't think expectations were for Iowa to win. You hoped that they were competitive. It didn't happen. The other very small glimmer of hope thing that I pointed out, and I'm referencing this and pointing it out mostly because when I did the A&F podcast in May, we drafted the 2024 class, and I took Jalen Watson #1 overall. And he's seeing the field, baby. He's been seeing the field pretty regularly on special teams now, had 2 tackles tonight, played in the game on defense, too, at corner. This is just his second year playing DB. This dude, I'm telling you, he might not be getting all the snaps like Reese Vanderzee, but I always got a dude on their hands. And his name is Jalen Watson. And keep an eye on this kid going forward. That's
big play, Jay.
That's what I'm saying. Anything else, guys, before we get out of here? No?
Well, I will one more thing, and again, this is going to sound like a bit of a backhanded compliment, but when you lose 35-7 and your 7 were the last points that get scored in the game, you're scraping to begin with. But you look around at the rest of the Big Ten, and Iowa losing 35-7 in Columbus is not even close to the most embarrassing loss of the weekend in the conference. So, number 10 Michigan loses by 10 in Washington. USC loses in Minnesota. Purdue loses by 46 at Camp Randall. Like, no one's going to care that Iowa lost by 28. That's below the fold stuff here. So don't feel embarrassed on Iowa's behalf, Hawkeye fans, because everyone's going to be talking about USC and Michigan and Bama instead. Don't worry about that.
All righty. We will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast. Again, hit that like button. If you're hitting like, you're liking the show. If you hit dislike, you're disliking the show, not disliking the outcome of the game. So hit like if you enjoy the podcast. Please hit that like button. Drop a comment as well. Again, this is a safe space, folks, to let your frustrations out. So again, we appreciate you tuning into this episode. Become a premium subscriber today to get all the intel from us at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. That's recruiting, that's football, that's basketball, all the intel behind the scenes, men's and women's basketball for that matter. So do that today. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, hit that subscribe button as well. That way you don't miss an episode. And it helps us out. We really appreciate it. Let us know, or tell a friend about the podcast as well. Hit that subscribe, do all the things for us. We greatly appreciate it. Again, folks, my name is Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. For now, we will see you next time.